Hi, this is Ikenke from Blue Steel Auto School again. Today we're going to talk about how to interpret your instrument panel, or some people call it your dashboard, right? It's pretty self-explanatory for the most part. There are a couple of things that I will bring your attention to that a lot of people don't know. But if you've been in a car, a lot of the things you know already, right? So let's get started. So this is the dashboard for a 2011 Subaru Impreza, right? Different cars might have slightly different things. There are some things that are universal, right? Some older cars and some newer cars are gonna have different technology, but again, some things you'll find on just about every car. Let's start with dead in the center. Dead in the center is your speedometer, right? The speedometer is exactly that. It tells you how fast you're going, right? It measures your speed, right? So if you look a little more closely, you'll see that for this particular car, it's got an analog speedometer. Some cars have digital. It has both miles per hour, which is what the US uses, and then if you see the smaller numbers on the inside, that's kilometers per hour. That's what most of the rest of the world uses, right? But it's simply just a measure of how fast you're going. And so if you know you want to go a particular speed, or you shouldn't go over a particular speed or under a particular speed, how do you know how fast you're going? You look at the speedometer, right? So for this car, the big lines that you see, as far as the miles per hour are concerned, represent tens, right? So you see right now the car is off, the needle is at 0. The very next line is a thick line, so that's 10. So everything from 1 to 9 is in between that 0 and 10, right? Then you have a skinny line after that. That's a 5, which is 15. Then you have another thick line. This one is labeled. If you notice, the even 10s are labeled, right? The odd 10s are not labeled, but you can infer what they are, So the 20 is labeled. Then you have a skinny line right after 20. So what must that be? If I just said that the skinny lines are 5s, that must be 25. And what's the speed limit most places in New York? 25. What's the speed limit on your road test? 25. Okay, so that means that's a very important one to know. When your needle is getting to that skinny line after the 20, that's 25. Right? If you go over that line, you fail your test. Right? The next line is a thick line, which is 30, right? So you notice, it's a 10 because it's thick, but it's not labeled. However, the thick 10 before that is 20, and the thick line after that is 40. So the thick line in between must be 30, right? And that's how it goes, right? And so you can go all the way around. This one is labeled up to 150, right? Well, it has markings up to 150. The last label is 140. But you see there's a skinny line after that and a thick line after that. And of course, most of us are never going to go that fast. Hopefully not, right? So that's an idea of the speedometer, right? And so literally, if you have to do constant checks of your speedometer, right? That's the only way to know how fast you're going, right? To the right of that is your gas gauge. Right now the car is off, so the needle is on E, because there's no power going to the gauges. Okay, and in a little bit I'll turn on some power and you'll see what happens, right? But E stands for empty, F stands for full, and if you notice under the F there's a little gas tank that has an arrow next to it. Different cars have the tank on different sides, right? So under the F, that arrow is telling you for this car, your tank is on the right side. Right? If the arrow is pointing to the left, then you know it's for the left side. Right? Now back to the middle, underneath the speedometer is your odometer and your gear indicator. They are digital for this car. You will see them once I give the car some power, right? But that digital window tells you your odometer tells you how far the car has traveled. Right? So like if you going to buy a car and people say, well, the car has 130,000 miles on it, that's how you know it has 130,000 miles on it, because the speedometer tells you. The odometer tells you. The speedometer measures your speed, and the odometer measures your distance, right? And next to that, which you'll see when I turn it on, there's a little square on the side that has a letter, typically a letter in it, sometimes a number, and that tells you what gear the car is in, right? And next to that, to the left, is your tachometer. Now this one does have a kind of strange name. That's not really self-explanatory. But the tachometer measures your RPM, your engine revolutions, right? And then if you look a little closer there, you see it says times 1,000 R per min, right? Revolutions per minute. So each of these numbers is not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 7. You have to multiply it by 1,000, right? And so I'm not going to go into detail about how the engine works, but just to give you an idea, you've probably heard of pistons before, so the pistons are pumping in the cylinders, and they interact with the gas and the spark plugs, and that ignition is what gives the car power, right? So the pistons keep pumping, they keep pumping. So the faster they're pumping, the more power gets delivered to the engine, right? So that's what that's measuring, is how fast the pistons in the engine are pumping, right? It can also be interpreted as how fast your wheels are turning, right? But the issue with that is that you can rev the engine without the car actually moving, right? You can rev the engine with the car in park, right? So the engine will rev, but the car won't move. So that's why it's best to look at it as the pistons pumping, right? Because that's telling you how hard the engine is working. All right, so and how fast it's working. So there's two different types of speed that you can glean from your dash, from your instrument panel. You can get an idea of your road speed, which is what the speedometer tells you. You get an idea of how hard the engine, or how fast the pistons have to pump in the engine in order to achieve that road speed, right? And then to maintain that road speed, right? Because the engine revs fastest when you're accelerating, and now once you get to the speed you want, then it calms down and settles in, right? And then of course when you stop, that's what they call idling. When the engine is on but you're sitting still, then the engine is just idling. So the pistons are just pumping, but at a very slow pace. So that's when the needle is down around the 1 somewhere, right? And then as you press harder, the needle climbs, all right? And you also have lights that will show up on your instrument panel, and the lights mean different things. So in order to get an idea of some of these things, I will turn the key. Now this is a key ignition as opposed to a push button ignition. So for the push button, you have to press the brake to start the engine. If you press the button without pressing the brake, you'll turn on the battery but not the engine. For a key start, you have ACC, and I'm gonna, we discussed this in a video before. I put the car in ACC now, so that allows you to use your radio and stuff like that, adjust your mirrors, but you notice nothing on the dash has changed, right? So now I'm gonna put it into on mode, right? On mode turns on most of the things in the car except for the engine, right? Click. Now you see it lights up like a Christmas tree, right? And you saw everything flash, right? So all those lights flash to let you know that at least the safety indicator is working, right? Because you have to be able to see the light to know if it's on, right? So you want to see all of them things flash. Right now it's still in on mode. I didn't start the engine yet, so some things will still stay on in on mode, but then once you start the engine, those things will flash again and then they'll come off, right? So we have some lights that are showing up here. The one that's blinking to the right there is your tire pressure monitor light. Sometimes on a very cold day like today, it might come on even when your tire's not that bad. It's just because, when it's cold, the pressure in your tire goes down, right? Just think of it. The tire is filled with air, which is gas, right? So when it's hot, gas expands. When it's cold, gas contracts, right? So when it's colder than normal, the gas, the air that's in your tire shrinks a little bit. And these things are very sensitive. So if it comes down on even like 2 psi, which is pounds per square inch of air, then the monitor will come on. And that's not necessarily a big deal. And then sometimes after you drive for a little bit, or when the weather warms up, it'll come back and it'll go off, right? So be careful not to just run and put too much air in your tire, because then when it warms up, you might have too much air in your tire. So you can walk around and eyeball the tires and see if it's just due to cold or if there's a real problem with the tire, right? But that lets you know that you may need air in your tire. For this car has sport mode, right? So that green light just lets you know that the light indicating sport mode is working. It's not in sport mode now, but remember, we're in the on position. We haven't started the engine yet. Underneath the sport light, that green sport light, you'll see the odometer. You see it says Odo. That tells you how many miles are on the car. Yes, this car is a workhorse, and I gotta say, it doesn't take as much money and as much work as you would think, so it's a good idea to get a good car, right? Do your research, get a car that's gonna cost you less time and money in the shop, right? And every car needs maintenance, so understand that there's no car that doesn't need maintenance. Every car needs maintenance and maybe some little repairs, but some cars need a lot more than others, right? Then the P there is just an indicator that the car is in park. That's the gear indicator, which we discussed before. You have the brake light at the top. That is just saying that the parking brake is active. I personally use my parking brake. I know a lot of people don't, but if you read the manual for most cars, it says, you shouldn't just leave the car in park. You should activate your parking brake, especially on hills, but even on flat surfaces. And I discussed that before. so I won't go into too much detail. Then you have the battery indicator, just letting you know that there's something wrong with the battery. Typically it might be more than just the battery if the battery light comes on, right? So, but it gives you an idea there's something wrong with the starting mechanism, right? And the charge, the alternator, possibly, right? Then you have the oil level. So if you see that on your car when the engine is on, that's bad news. You need to pull over right away, right? If you see that means that there's not enough oil in your engine, and if you keep driving, the engine is going to seize up, and then once it seizes up, you just need to get a new engine, and engines aren't cheap. So that's, again, you need maintenance. You need to know when to take your car in for maintenance. You can't just drive and don't get it serviced, right? Because one day you're going to see that light, and it might be too late. Check engine light could be severe, could be minor. It could be as simple as you didn't tighten your cap properly, or it could mean that you need a new engine, right? So have that looked at when you see it. The AWD just lets you know that all-wheel drive is working. At oil temp is another thing you don't want to see. That also can indicate something's wrong with the oil. Either there's not enough oil, or the oil has degraded too much, and it's not doing its job to lubricate and keep the engine at a certain temperature, right? So again, you see that light, pull over, right? And hopefully try to see if somebody could bring you some oil or something, or you might have to get it towed. And then that light at the bottom is for traction control, just telling you that the traction control is not active. And again, this is just telling you, because it's in the on position, that the light works. You see what happened with the gas gauge now that we have the car in the on position. So you see it came off of empty. It's just a little below half a tank. And then over here, the tachometer is still at 0 because we turned on the battery but not the engine, right? So let's see what happens now if I start the car. And I just have the habit, I think it's a good habit. In some cars you don't have a choice, but I have the habit of pressing the brake to start the car. Now I'm going to start it. Alright, so you see everything flashes and then goes off, right? So again, you want to see pretty much an empty display up here, right? I already explained the tire situation. It's, the tires are fine. It's just really cold today. And that brake light is the parking brake, so if I put this parking brake down, you see the parking brake went out, right? If I pull it back up, the parking brake light comes back on. So that lets you know, because you don't want to drive with that, right? So when you park the car and you're going to be sitting for a long time, or you're going to be leaving the car, you activate your parking brake. But then when it's time to drive, you got to deactivate it. So that light lets you know whether it's on or off, just in case you forget. And look what happened to the tachometer. The needle moved from 0 to 1. This is idling speed for this car and for most cars, right? So, and if you see, I just lightly tap the gas. You see, as I tap the gas, you notice the tachometer needle moves because the engine is revving. But you notice the speedometer needle doesn't move because we're not moving anywhere, right? But as we start to speed up and as the car is actually moving, then you'll see the speedometer needle move. Alright? And so this is how you interpret your instrument panel. Alright? And like I said, some cars will have slightly different things. But this should give you an idea. on how to make sense of everything.